Hello everyone. In this session, I'll be covering basics and tips for scientific writing. Hopefully by the end of this session, you will have some useful tips on writing a research paper. So this could be your thesis, an article, or if you're doing a literature review. And then I'll also go on and talk about searching online databases for papers to include in your literature review, for example. And then finally, as you know, scientific writing requires you to have a complete list of references. So I'll show you how to use one of the software to help you write and list your references. So scientific writing can actually be considered a distinct type of writing. This is because scientific writing has to be precise and planned. It's not like writing, for example, a story or just an essay. Scientific writing is based on experimental results, either yours or others. So the words you choose, they have to clearly explain and reflect the results you're presenting in your paper. Scientific papers also have a specific structures. So the scientific community, the scientists expect you to write a scientific paper in a specific structure. And this is really important to follow. Also very important is our titles. So you have the main title of your paper, and then you have internal titles. These titles must reflect what you mention under them, so in their corresponding sections. So something to keep in mind is that scientific writing is not about the writer understanding what she wrote, but what is important is that the majority of the readers understand what the author had in mind. So let's say you're writing a paper where you're gonna explain your own results, such as your research thesis or a publication paper. So later on, I'll talk about how you do the structure of a literature review, where you do a standalone paper on reviewing literature, so basically reviewing the works of others, but does not include your results. But for now, let's focus on the structure of, for example, a research thesis or any paper that includes your own results. So it must follow the Emmerich structure. So I is for introduction, which is most of the time includes a literature review, and then you have the method section, and then read for results, and then followed by discussion, and often followed by a conclusion section. And sometimes these two are fused, a discussion and conclusion. So the introduction, as you would expect, you're introducing your topic. So you would do this by summarizing the relevant published literature on your research topic. And I underlined relevant because it's easy to feel overwhelmed when you do a database search by all the information you get. But if you focus on the relevant literature, it makes your writing easier in the introduction. You always should remember that scientific writing always needs to be precise. So that means you have to avoid using extra words, even if they look nice, or even extra information, even if they're correct. You have to focus on the relevant topic. So one tip for writing an introduction in an efficient process is to start by writing the last paragraph of the introduction. So the last paragraph, you would mention the logic of the experiments, why you did these experiments, and within this paragraph, you would have different concepts that you automatically mentioned. So you highlight these concepts, and then you basically reverse engineer the rest of the introduction. So you explain the concepts that you introduced, that you mentioned in the last paragraph. So this allows you to be precise and to only introduce and only talk about the relevant concepts. On the contrary, if you just start writing introduction from the beginning, you'll be introducing different ideas and different concepts that are not necessarily related to your topic. So for example, this is the last paragraph of the paper I was reading. And if you look at it, I'm just going to read it quickly. The regulation of stathine phosphorylation in metastatic cancers is not fully understood. Here we report that RISC-2 signals through stathmin to regulate cytoskeleton stability and promotes cancer cell invasion and tumor metastasis in human cancers. So as you can see, I've highlighted the main concepts. The concepts are specific. So I didn't highlight cancer alone because cancer is general. It does not need definition. But metastatic cancer, it's a specific form or stage of cancer, which needs to be introduced. So this would be, for example, your concept 1. You have to introduce into your introduction. And then risk 2 is a specific gene, which not many people would know about, so you have to introduce it as well, talk about it. Staffing is another gene you have to introduce. And then cytoskeleton stability is a process that also, it's not too familiar. It's not a general process, so you have to also explain it as well. Some people know about it, some others are not very familiar, so you have to explain it. And in this way, you can see that you can focus your attention in your introduction on relevant concepts. Introducing these concepts would be sufficient and would prevent you from losing focus in your introduction. So now let's go to the methods section. So for example, when you're writing your research thesis, this section describes exactly how you have done the experiment. So keep in mind when writing this section that someone else should be able to read your method section, explanation, and be able to repeat these experiments and reproduce the same results. So as you're writing your methods, keep that in mind. The methods section, because you're doing different experiments, different techniques, it has to be subdivided based on these experiments or techniques that you have done. So for example, if you've done qPCR, it would have a different section. If you've done Western blot, it would have another section. And if you're doing bioinformatics analysis, so if you're doing online research, you would also include using the methods separately. In general, but especially in the methods section, always use passive voice. So instead of saying I cultured the cells or I incubated the cells, you should say the cells were incubated. So in this way, you focus on what has been done instead of who did this. So here I'm showing you an example from my own master's thesis. I just want to point out a few things. So first thing I want to point out is that you must mention what you have done in details. So if you look here, I've mentioned that the HEBG2 cells were purchased from the American Type Culture Collection Organization. So I've even mentioned where we purchased the cells. So you have to mention in details, unless you're told otherwise, but generally you have to mention the details. And as you can see, I've used a passive voice. So the HEBG2 cells were purchased, the HEBG2 was used, and then and so on. So the cells were maintained. The second thing I want to talk about is that I've divided it based on timeline order, based on chronological order. So I talked about cell preparation in one section. And then obviously the next section would be what I did with the cells. So knocking down gene expression using siRNA. So it wouldn't make sense if I mentioned knocking down gene expression before cell preparation. So when possible, always order your sections based on a timeline. So you prepare cells and then you use them to knock down gene expression in those cells. Sometimes you do different experiments, it's not related, so it's not possible for a timeline or a chronological order. So there's exceptions, but the rule is to always use chronological order when possible. So now let's go to the results section. So the results section is where you present your experimental results. So that includes figures that you get from doing experiments in the lab, Western blot, qPCR, or even tables or figures that you get from bioinformatic tools. So one thing to keep in mind, to order your results, a section in your results, according to the order of the methods when possible. However, sometimes a specific result comes from different methods, so it's not easy to match it exactly. So just keep that in mind. But as much as possible, the results and method should be as much as possible matching. In the results section, it's very important to show the strong and complete scientific results. This is because in the results section, you should only plainly present your results. So you're not going to discuss basic results. You're just going to have an objective stand, somewhat of an objective stand, just going to plainly and clearly present the results as they are without providing discussion. So this is the separation between this section and the next section. So the result, you plainly and clearly present the results only and come to a logical conclusion without much discussion or explanation. So here's an example of the results section of my own thesis, master's thesis. And here we have a figure of a Western blot, and then this is a representative Western blot, and this is a quantification. And then, as you know, you have to include a caption under your figure. The caption explains everything you see on the blot. So E for empty vector, wild type, and then different variants. Explain the axes. Explain how you got this experiment briefly, and then also if there's any statistics, you explain it in the figure. But what I want to focus on is that in the results text, I just simply and plainly explained what I see in the figure and came to a logical conclusion. So I said that the wild type and the variants had a lower protein expression level than the empty vector. I did not do much explanation. I did not try to justify my results. And this is what makes the discussion important. So the discussion is where you make inferences, you interpret the results, you discuss the results, you provide more explanation when needed. So in the discussion, you kind of put everything into a complete picture. So based on your research hypothesis, based on your results, you put things into complete picture within the previous known literature context. So you connect different results of your own together, as well as putting in the context of a literature, what you know in literature already been published. A very important part of the discussion, which will help you lessen the criticism. Obviously, each paper will receive criticism, but from scholars and scientists. But a way to lessen this criticism is by anticipating the criticism and suggesting future directions. So at the end of your discussion, and sometimes this is included in the conclusion section. The conclusion section, as I mentioned, you would conclude the main results. So in the discussion or in the conclusion, you would mention that basically, in other words, you are aware that there are certain topics that your research has not addressed, and you would suggest future experiments to possibly address these. So if you do that, this will help you reduce the amount of criticism that you receive. Hopefully. So I just want to show an example of a discussion section and just want to point out a few things. So on the contrary to what we saw from the results, the discussion section contains information from literature. So not only my results. So here I'm using information from literature, all here references, and then I'm talking about my results. And then I'm talking about different results and how they integrate about my results and how they integrate with the literature and making sense from all this discussing and explaining. So this is what the discussion section is for. So now I talked about writing a paper where you're focusing on explaining your own research experiments, research work. So now I know that some of you will be writing a literature review paper. This is a standalone, separate piece of paper that just focuses on doing a literature review about a specific topic. So what is a literature review? A literature review is not an essay, so it's not based on your opinion. A literature review can be part of your thesis, so it can be a short part of your introduction, as I mentioned. But what I'm talking about here, what I'm explaining, is the standalone, the lengthier standalone product. So a paper that just explains the literature. A literature review is supposed to be objective for the most part, so it does not prove or disprove main points. So what are the literature? So these are the major papers published about your narrow topic. And see how I just kind of focus on narrow topic, because you have to stay focused and able to write a meaningful and a concise literature review. So for example, if you're doing a literature review about Jimmy's regulation in breast cancer, Jimmy is a gene, Jimmy's regulation in breast cancer, you're not looking at all cancer, papers about all cancer, literature about all cancer, that will be overwhelming and painful. You're not looking at gene regulation process in general, and you're not looking at Jimmy in general. You're focusing on this part, Jimmy's regulation in breast cancer. Obviously, it could be useful to include some bits and parts outside this area, but in general, you should focus on this area. You should find papers that are relevant in this area. So how do you provide a review? So after you find the relevant papers about your specific narrow topic using database online search, as I'll be talking about later, I'll explain more about later, you summarize the major concepts and outcomes of each paper. And then, in your own words, you show the relationship between these summaries. So remember, a literature review is not basically summarizing each paper and listing them in a literature review. So you don't just summarize one paper and separately list it in your literature review. You're summarizing ideas and then connecting these ideas together. And in your own words, you're writing these ideas together. So one sentence can contain ideas from more than one paper. And then your references should include more than one paper. So literature review is also divided into subsections. And the subsections could be divided based on chronological order. So based on what we knew first. So what we know first about this topic. So when was it discovered and based on chronological timeline order. However, this is not always the best way to order your literature review sections. And I'll talk more about this later on. So the take-home message is that a review, you extract the major elements of each relevant paper, and then you show the relationships among those major elements in your own words. So why would we write a literature review? So if you're a student, a literature review will improve your understanding. You will demonstrate the knowledge of a specific topic. A literature review is not only done by students, so there's scientists that published literature reviews all the time. So they do that because literature reviews are useful in bringing the readers up to date with what is known about a specific subject. So let's say a specific subject, a specific research has been done over the years, and there's many data about this narrow specific subject, some important and some less important. So a literature review comes to basically provide an update of everything we know so far about this narrow topic. So instead of going back, let's say 20 years, and looking at all the papers, the literature review provides important and major outcomes about this research topic in one paper. So now let's talk about the structure of a literature review. So a structure of a literature review is it's quite simple. So it has an introduction, body, and a conclusion. And at times, the introduction and body are fused into one part, or not clearly defined. So if you do have an introduction, it's a short paragraph. It's a short section, has 1 to 2 paragraphs. In these paragraphs, you explain the wider context of your of the research topic. So you just explain in broader terms, just introduce into this topic, and then go on to explain the topic importance. Why is it important to look at this topic research? And then at the end of your introduction, you would list and talk about your aims of this review. What do you hope to establish by this review, by reviewing this? And then the next section is the body, and the body is by far the main part of a literature review. It is divided into subsections where you write, as I mentioned, the major literature findings in your own words and how they relate to each other. The different subsections are divided, as I mentioned, can be divided based on chronological order, or based on importance, or based on specific questions, as I'll show in the example that's coming, that I'll be talking about soon. And finally, the conclusion. It as well is short, consists of 1 to 2 paragraphs usually, and in the conclusion, you summarize the current knowledge of this topic. So you summarize the major points that you have listed in the body. And then an important part of the conclusion is you should talk about the areas you think the current research has not addressed yet. So now let's look at an example. So this is a literature review paper. So the title is The Regulation of Actin Nucleation in Autophagous Formation. So here it starts with an introduction. It's a short 2-paragraph introduction almost. Okay, so the introduction is started just talking about introducing to the topic in broader terms and wider context. So start by talking about autophagy, and then goes on to talk about the importance of this topic. And then at the end of this introduction, it explains what is the focus of this review, what is the aim of this review. And then here, the body of the literature review starts. So you have autophagy formation as a title. So as you can see, the subsections of the literature review is not divided based on chronological order or timeline order. It's divided based on the different topics, or divided based on the different questions. Another thing I want to point out is that if you look here, this sentence is made up. It's not a summary of one paper. It's ideas taken from different papers, and in your own words or in the author's words, it's written down as one sentence, and it's coming from different papers. So I want to stress that a literature review is not summarizing each paper you read and then moving on to the next one. It's showing the relationship between them in your own words under relevant sections. Then if you go all the way, as I mentioned, the body is the main part. Then there is a short conclusion section. And as I mentioned, the conclusion, you summarize the major points that you've mentioned, and you also provide an overview of what you think this research, the research so far, the research up to date has not addressed yet. Okay, so now we talked about the structure of scientific papers. Now let's focus on writing format and writing tips. So one of the main tips that you should always keep in mind is that you should break down a section into separate paragraphs. Some people will tell you that the length of a paragraph is a specific length, for example, 350 words, but I don't think this is this is always the case. So you shouldn't think about the word limit. What you should focus on is this: an entire paragraph should concern itself with a single focus. So it should contain its own main focus. So one paragraph, one focus. When you talk about a different idea, start a new paragraph. And if the paragraph is too long, consider splitting. So even if you're talking about one idea, it's perfectly acceptable to begin a paragraph with a sentence connecting to the previous paragraph. But just remember that one paragraph focuses on one idea. If you're talking about a different concept, different idea, split the paragraph. And as much as you can, paragraphs should be all of roughly similar length. So now let's focus even more. Let's focus within the paragraph. You should always begin the paragraph with an introductory sentence or statement. So the paragraph should begin with an introductory statement. Each paragraph should begin with an introductory statement. This statement is what is the point you're about to discuss in paragraph. So your first statement should be about the point you're about to discuss in paragraph. You're stating something, and then the remainder of the paragraph should go on to explain and unpack the initial sentence. So I'll give you an example in the next page, but just keep the focus on having this sentence, and then the next sentences, as I mentioned, try to develop your ideas logically and sequentially within the paragraph. So you have the sentence, introductory sentence, introducing a statement, and then the remainder of the paragraph you should explain and unpack this sentence. Avoid broken paragraphs. So what I mean by this is, as I mentioned before, avoid having multiple ideas in one paragraph, as well as don't forget to use transition words in your paragraph, such as a result, however, in addition. All these words help to not only look better, but they help the reader read your paper easily. Your paragraph will look more connected and would be easier to follow. Okay. And one extra tip is avoid using superlative and repetitive words. So for example, sometimes you might have the urge to say, for example, this is it was a very significant increase in protein, levels. Don't use very as a superlative. This is an extra. Scientific language should be precise, should be objective. So you would say a significant increase in protein levels. So this is an example of a paragraph. So let's look at the first sentence. So the first sentence is a statement. What it's saying here, IMP1 transcription is at least partially activated by the Wnt signaling pathway. So I made this claim, I made this sentence, and then I go on to prove and explain this further. So I said studies have shown that the Wnt signaling transcription factors beta-catenin and CCF4 binds to a promoter, and so on. So I'm unpacking and explaining and proving my first statement. And then another thing I want to point to is that the use of transition words. So if I just use sentences after another sentence and then another sentence, and I don't show the connection between them, it would be hard for the reader to follow because for you know that the sentences are connected, but for the reader, he might not connect the ideas. So using a transition phrase such as this in support of this, it was also shown, it helps connect this idea to that idea. As well as here, therefore, it helps connect and show the relationship between the different sentences. So always keep in mind and use smart transition phrases or words. The last thing I want to talk about when it comes to writing is to always revise and edit. Always perhaps take a time off, a day off, and then go back and read your paper. And then look if your scientific story makes sense. And did you include the most important points within the word limit? If not, consider removing extra information not relevant to your topic and including the important points. Also, it's really useful if you let others read your paper, even if you're not expert, just your peers, even if you're same level, they can give you an outsider look. They can give you, like, as they say, a second opinion. So you can ask them and check if they can smoothly go through it, or do they need explanation for some parts. If they do need explanation, then most likely other people will also need explanation when they read your paper. Also, it's never too late to revise sentences. So if you go back and read your paper and you read a specific sentence and it does make sense, but it's too long, and there's a better way to rewrite it in a more concise and more clear way, go ahead and do that. It's always perhaps every time you read the paper, you're always going to find ways to revise the sentence, make it shorter. I'm a big advocate of in scientific papers using the least amount of words while still remaining clear. That makes your paper easier to read, easier to connect all the ideas together when you have shorter sentences. And finally, titles. So you have internal titles and you have the main title. So these titles should always reflect what goes under them. So let's say you write a section, it already has a title and you write a section. So you finish writing the section. So if you look at the section again and the title no longer reflects what's inside that section, then consider revising the title. It's never too late. Okay, so now I'm going to move to providing some basics on searching databases for literature. So there's different online databases. The best ones are, for many people, as well for me, are PubMed and then Google Scholar. PubMed is probably the best one available. When you're writing a scientific paper, always use academic peer-reviewed paper. So by that, an academic peer-reviewed paper means that it was reviewed by scientists, by scholars, and it was deemed to have enough quality to be published in an academic paper. So not only after that, not only not only look at if it's peer reviewed, but it's even better if you can choose the best journals, even if all of them are peer reviewed. It's best to choose the best journals, so such as Nature and so on. But if you're not familiar with the journals, the name of journals, you can Google their impact factor. So you write the name of the journal, and then you write impact factor, and then it would tell you what is the impact factor. The impact factor is a reflective of how much was it cited. So that reflects the quality of this journal. So normally above 2 is acceptable. Above 2 impact factor is acceptable or good. Obviously you want it to be higher. Some papers, such as Nature, is around 40. Okay. So now let's take a look at how to use online databases to search for papers. Okay, so let's say I'm interested in looking for papers on a specific topic. This specific topic is Jimmy's regulation of P53. So you don't have to write full sentences, but write keywords, Jimmy, P53, cancer. So I'm interested in looking at Jimmy's regulation of P53 in cancer. But here I'm just writing keywords. So as you can see, there's many different papers. Some are free, others are not. Let's say I'm interested in this paper, click on it. So before you read the paper, you don't want to, if you're doing a literature review or if you're writing your introduction, you don't want to waste a lot of time just reading the whole paper. You can start by reading the abstract. And if the abstract has relevant information to you, information that would be helpful to write your paper, you can go on and look at the full text. So you'll find somewhere it says full text. So as you can see, this paper is, you have to purchase it, so it's not for free. Luckily, if you're a university student and, for example, as an NTU student, you can go to the NTU library, type NTU library, and then library one search. And then you have two options. This is more sophisticated, as it mentions, and this one is simple, so choose the simple one. And then copy the title of the paper that you need. Just copy the title you need. And now you can search for it. Okay, so it didn't find it because the option was set on targeted search. So mainly books, so change it to extended search, which includes books, articles, and more. This is an article, so we have to choose this one, extended search. Always use extended search to look for everything. So as you can see, just double check. Yes, we found the paper. It's the exact same title. And an advantage of using the NTU library search is it tells you they do have the full text for free for you. So it's for free if you use the NTU library search. And this is just two different links. You can choose any one of them. And then it takes you to the paper, hopefully. Okay. So now you have a full paper for free. Now, if you want to download it, if you want to look at it offline later on, you can press on this to download the paper later. Downloading the paper will also be useful for the next part that I want to talk about, which is referencing. So as I mentioned, whenever you read a scientific paper, referencing is extremely important. It wouldn't be acceptable without any reference. So whenever you mention an idea from any paper, you have to reference it. You have to mention the reference in two parts: in the in-text, so in the body, as you write, and also in a separate page, which is the last page of your paper, under the references list. This used to be quite a difficult task where you have to manually write down the references and then go to the reference list and mention in more details all of the references. But now, fortunately, with advancement in today's technology, it became much easier. So one of the software that I like, and it's also free of charge, is Mendeley. So you can search for Mendeley on Google, download it, install it for free. So let's try Mendeley. I've already installed it. So let's try Mendeley. Okay, Mendeley. I've already installed it, so just here, Mendeley. It's going to open. So I have some papers inside, but let's assume you still don't have any papers. It's going to delete all the papers. Okay. So if you remember, we've downloaded a paper. So now I'm just going to add this paper here. So this is our paper. Add it. So let's say we use some information from this paper. We used some ideas, and we included it in our literature review. So I'm going to open a Word document. And we included some information. For example, we said, let's check some information. It's supposed to make sense, but I'm just going to write anything for now. And then annulation. So this is, for example, a sentence. So now, since you've installed Mendeley, it automatically integrates into your Word. So you can see this whole section is from Mendeley. So if you go to references in Word, you can choose which style you need. So it can be any of these different styles based on the requirement. Most of the time for me, it's been American Psychological Association. So I'm going to keep it at this. And then click on Insert Citation. Go to Mendeley, and then select the paper that you took the ideas from and cite. And it gives you most of the time a perfect citation. Now we can do this again. If you're taking ideas from more papers, let's say you have these two papers as well. I've downloaded these two papers as well. So ideas from, let's say this sentence is from two papers. Now I can go to Mendeley again, and I can cite both papers. This one. If you press on Control and select it with your mouse pointer, you can select both. If you keep holding on Control and then click on Cite. And here you've cited both papers. So now you have the citation in the in-text. You have the in-text citation. So now you have to make a reference. When you finish writing, you have to make a reference list. So I'm going to make a new page, name it References. And now if you go back to References here and click on Insert Bibliography. Insert Bibliography. So you can see, I'm just going to scroll down to show you. You have the perfect reference list. It's even ordered. It's even in a alphabetical order. So maybe just in case, you can go and check it quickly to see if it looks good. But most of the time it is. One last thing I want to mention is that, let's say later on, you decide to add a reference or even remove a reference. So I removed this reference, removed everything here. So now you don't have to worry about this, changing this. Especially when you have finished a paper and you have so many other references, you have to go back and look for it. You don't have to worry about it. If you just press on refresh, it automatically also removes it from your references list. Okay, so this was everything I wanted to share with you about scientific writing. Hopefully you'll find it useful. Okay. Thank you very much.